How's it going, everyone? Welcome back to a different show here that we are doing today. Very excited to have Sean back on here from Apex Sports and Yard Barker. And if you can't believe it, I can't believe it. We are in week 7 of the NFL. So we are going to do something that's a little bit new to the show here. We're going to recap. And Sean and I have been doing this over the last couple of weeks. And basically what we've been doing is we'll have one really long show and we'll get into, what we said from the previous week, see if it panned out for us. I am drinking out of I'm going to show you this real quick. This should say, I drink coffee and no fantasy football things. So that's how good I'm feeling about myself over the last 2 weeks. How are you feeling, Sean?
Not too bad. Only part of my main DFS, and a lot of the experts punted ahead. I had Dak in there as my quarterback because I thought he'd go a little bit under on the slate, and with a 52 implied total, he obviously that's like that early interception, he never recovered. But we had a lot of good start recommendations that worked out and sits, but that stung me a little bit. I just thought, with that, we expected a back and forth and at home, and it wasn't too good. So that one kind of bothered me a little bit.
All right.
But overall, pretty good.
Good deal. Well, I will say this. My Ravens have won 3 in a row now, so I'm still growing this out for the winning streak. Can't shave that off when you're on a winning streak.
That's right.
All right. Well, let's get into it, though. We had an interesting week again. A lot of injuries. And even today, I tell you what, before we get into fantasy football, let's get into what's happened today, because there have been 2 very big trades that have happened just today. And if you watched one of my podcasts that I put out there when Davante Adams apparently pulled his hamstring and couldn't play for the Raiders anymore, go back and watch that video. I'm not BSing you. I had 3 teams as my top 3 teams to where Davante Adams would go. 1 was the Steelers, 2 was the Jets, and then 3 was a long shot with the New England Patriots, just because I figured they've got a lot of cap space there. If they wanted to do right by Drake May, they could get him a viable target for the future here, going after him. Didn't think Davante would want to do that, but again, he didn't really have a choice anyway. Looks like the Las Vegas Raiders have broken down, and they have traded Davante Adams to the New York Jets, which we kind of all saw coming here, and especially after last night with what happened to the Jets, they probably could have used him there as an extra weapon toward the end of the game.
Yep, and he also, you and I were messaging back and forth this morning. He was already in New York, and I would be shocked if he's not suited up this weekend. And he came on the Pat McAfee show with Rodgers today too, so he was already with them. So they're,
Wow.
he obviously, I was surprised he went to the Raiders to begin with. Now I know he was college buddies with David Carr, so that's what got him there, obviously. And he did. I mean, he was, from a fantasy perspective, he was peppered like crazy with targets. But this year their quarterback situation, I mean, they really just don't have one right now. So he surprisingly bowed out with a hamstring, and it was probably the Raiders' way. My theory is it's the Raiders' way to save face and not have to suspend him without pay and make it uglier. So he had an injury. I mean, obviously, I can't with any certainty prove this, but I just find it hard to believe that he was injured with, and then during the time that he supposedly has to be traded. But from a fantasy perspective, I think he actually helps Garrett Wilson. We'll get, just to get us started, and because you can't roll coverage, obviously. I think the one that it hurts is Mike Williams, and I wouldn't be surprised if he gets sent packing here to someone, maybe the Chiefs, someone like that, maybe the Steelers, someone like that. But I mean, he's probably behind Lazard just because Rodgers is, close with Lazard. So I think he's down a 4th on the pecking order. So from fantasy, I think that that's kind of how I look at it. I think it helps Wilson, though.
Yeah, for sure. I agree with you too. And I think for Mike Williams, I think he's done there. Especially after last night, that big missed catch or fall down or whatever you want to call it at the end of the game last night, where he didn't come up with it. And we'll get into the wide receiver rankings for last week, but hint, there's a couple of Jets that are up at the top 10, 2 of them actually that did very well last night. And I was telling Sean this earlier. I was sweating bullets. I was up by 25 in one league, going up against Garrett Wilson, and after one half, he's already got 13 points.
Yeah.
And it was looking like it was going to be a shootout. So that's the first one. And before we get into the second wide receiver that got traded, what do you think this does for Hassan Reddick? They have basically today also announced that they are going to allow him to trade.
So, I mean, the Jets, like my work colleague, he's a big Jets fan, and he's like, the circus never leaves town. I mean, Drew Rosenhaus, he got Rosenhaus for a reason. He'll get it done. He'll get him somewhere. I just don't know why they got him if they're not going to pay him. I mean, I don't know. He must be asking for – it's usually about the guaranteed money, these contracts, or the years. So it's one of those two. So, but, he's got – I would think the Jets don't have a lot of leverage here, but I would think he's got to command a day one draft pick, which is not a bad thing for the Jets. They can get one back. They didn't give up a lot for Adams. I think it was a third or fourth rounder. But a third rounder is a starter nowadays.
Yeah, contingent. It could be a second rounder.
Yeah. So, but yeah, I don't, Reddick, it'll get done. That's Rosenhaus. I mean, there's no better agent. So,
yeah. Well, and then we've got our second wide receiver trade of the morning. One that I missed. I was busy getting ready for the show here, and Sean told me about it. Amari Cooper traded from the Browns over to the Bills.
Yeah, he's going
another team that played last night.
Yep. And you would think he immediately vaults to the Bills. That's the one thing they didn't have. They have a really good tight end. I don't think he gets enough. Well, he gets targeted, but I don't think he gets enough catches. But, I mean, obviously, they tried to replace him with the Coleman, and the other guys. But, now you have a legitimate, veteran wide receiver one. So that's only going to help them. People thought maybe he was going to go to the Chiefs as well. But, that's a great pickup for Buffalo. And obviously, I give kudos to my brother to this. He pointed out a good point. He said this could also have been an answer to the Adams trade, within the division. That was a 3-point game last night. They'll see him again. There's a lot of football to be played with, but this is it's a good get for the Bills, no doubt.
Yeah, the AFC East gets a lot scarier now, doesn't it?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Tua is supposed to be coming back here, maybe not this week, but maybe the following week. So all of a sudden, Miami could, for lack of better words, save their season, get their pieces. There's a lot of good fantasy pieces on that team. So.
Oh, yeah, for sure. All right. Anything else football-wise you want to talk about before we get into week 6 performances?
Just one other thing I was doing, catching up on the way before we joined. And this is some speculation, maybe a Deontay Johnson going to the Chiefs possibly. They were also talking about where does Juju fit in, but right now, we'll talk about that in free agency, but Juju right now is looking like the piece there. But does Deontay Johnson go on the move? Do they just fire sale that Panthers thing? So that was another name to be on the lookout for.
Yeah, and for me, the rumors about Deontay Johnson, it's kind of surprising to me because he just got there. I mean, he hasn't been a Carolina Panther for 6 games. That's it.
Yeah.
So it's kind of odd that they're just going to give up on that right away, or at least the rumors are that they're going to give up on that. That to me seems a bit odd, but I guess if you can get a haul from someone, why not? They're rebuilding anyway. So.
And I was just hoping. I mean, the Steelers got a good corner out of that. I'm a big Steeler fan, but they have a big void on the other side of the field, and they can't really get Pickens the ball. Again, another one with a lot of targets, but not a lot of catches that he should be getting. So, and that's because, there's nothing on the other side that you have to pay attention to.
All right. We've got one question from Antonio Lopez for waivers. I need running backs more. Choose 6 PPR. Tua, Likely, Davis, Braylon, Vidal, Zamir White, Chandler Corum, Mostert, Wright, Juju. That's a lot of guys. I tell you what.
He needs a running back. He needs a running back. Is that what
I tell you what? Yeah, Antonio, we're going to get into this real quick. We're going to start with quarterbacks, and then
we'll get to him soon.
We'll get into running backs because there is quite a bit to cover, especially when we get to the running backs and wide receivers. Quarterbacks, maybe not so much. But looking back at week 6, hope everybody had a great week 6 in fantasy. Top quarterbacks for week 6 we had in kind of a particular order. I guess it depends on what kind of scoring system that you're playing in. But Caleb Williams was the big go-to guy. this weekend, scoring anywhere around 27 points. And then we had Baker, Jordan Love, Jared Goff, Purdy, Allen, Hurts, Fields, Jaden Daniels, Bo Nix in the top 10, Lamar Jackson, Joe Burrow, Drake May, I'm going to throw in there, number 13, and then Stroud at 14, just because at the end there, depending on what kind of format you're into, Jackson would have gotten you anywhere from 17 to 19. May would have gotten you anywhere from 15 to 19. And then Stroud, Burrow, you're in that 18 to 20 type area. So one thing that I'll say right away for that group of individuals, I had as my start information from last week, Jaden Daniels as a start and Lamar Jackson as a start. Figured they would have gotten a little bit more into those games, but I also had Justin Fields as a sleeper. So if you took my advice on that one, you got yourself a pretty decent 21 to 24 points from Fields in that category. Told you to sit Herbert and Lawrence. They finished somewhere around 18 to 20 in that area. My other sleepers didn't come through. I had Kirk Cousins. He was somewhere in that same area, 19 to 20. He would have gotten you about maybe 12 and a half points. And then Daniel Jones stayed asleep as well. So what are your takeaways from that top 12?
Well, for me, I had two, just to piggyback. Obviously, one, you already said one, Bo Nix. I believe in 3 of the last 4 starts, he's had QB1 numbers. He had 61 yards rushing. So I'll just add in and then my second one was Drake May. Drake May had over 20 points. So and like you and I, we try not to just do the obvious all the time. But for me, that was obviously he's making, if he's going to play like that, he's going to make some players on that team fantasy relevant. And Nix wasn't great, like I said, but if you watch the game, it's like Justin Fields. I'm a Steeler fan. Watching Justin Fields play can be painful, but the fantasy output ends up coming there when you get 60 yards rushing from your quarterback like Nix did. Those are my 2 biggest, Nix and May, and those are 2 that I was going to give you for waiver pickups, ones that might be out there for you. In real deeper leagues, those guys are, and most leagues, those guys are probably out there. I had it pulled up here for us. May's and 5% rostered in leagues. So that's really, he's probably out there. So you could do worse than him. I think he's competent, and he's from right here he's from right here in Charlotte, went to high school at a school in a conference that I coach in. So,
nice.
But yeah, those are my 2 takeaways, was May and Nix from the quarterback perspective. And then, kind of what I like for waivers this week.
Yeah. Both of them are, I suppose going back to it, 4 rookie quarterbacks in the top 10 this week.
Mm-hmm.
So that is something to look out for. Again, Drake May, I had Drake May and Bo Nix. Both of them are in the 5 to 10% for people owning those 2 individuals. I actually have Bo Nix in one of my leagues. I had high hopes for him. He's my backup, obviously, behind my main quarterback. But if he keeps playing the way that he does, he might be rostered a little bit more. And just to get into the waivers of Flacco a little bit more, to give you guys some info, Andy Dalton is not owned by that much. 3 losses in a row for Carolina. His job might be in jeopardy going back to Bryce Young. So I wouldn't waste a waiver on Dalton at this point. That's going to be a wait and see. Joe Flacco, while he's been 2-1, he's been much more. I feel bad for Flacco at this point, because you're on a team that actually works for you with all those wide receivers on there. And it looks like he's going to go back to the bench. They came out earlier and said that Anthony Richardson is coming back, which I think is foolish, because if you look at your schedule.
Jeff, if you want fantasy, if you have a lot of Colt stock and receivers, you want Flacco, especially if you have Josh Downs. Yeah. You want him to stay as quarterback, because Richardson can't get them the ball. He's probably the least inaccurate passer out there. Yeah, he's at 50.6% right now through 4 games, which is awful, especially nowadays with the short passes, the bubble screens, and all that. 50% is it's unheard of.
Yeah, So I would hold off on Flacco here. I actually dropped him after week 2, thinking that AR was going to come back, but he did play again, and it's kind of funny. In the other league, my wife picked him up. So we're a Flacco family. And then if you're thinking about Spencer Rattler, here might be a question. I say no to Spencer
Mhm.
Rattler, only because the next two games are against really hard defenses. He's going against
Yeah.
Denver and he's going against the Chargers. We don't really know what his wide receiver outlook is going to look like either. We'll get into the wide receivers, but
Olave's out for sure.
yeah,
On a
potentially
short
no
week.
Olave and no Rashid.
Yeah.
So that's going to be tough for Rattler to do anything with. I would say,
Yep.
maybe stay away from him. Go with Drake. Go with Nix. Find someone else.
And I have one other thing I was just not waivers, but takeaway for quarterback. I'm sorry, I just throw in since we're on quarterbacks, and I was doing my research I started writing my my main article for DFS. Jordan Love in 4 games, okay, averaging 23.78 fantasy points. That would be QB2. So I thought that's pretty impressive. So, and if you're doing DFS, he's one to look at. Hint, hint. He might be in my article because he's 3rd highest, but he's on a slate, with the Jacksons and all. There's a lot of big names, but I thought that was pretty impressive that he'd be QB2 right now if he at that pace right now. If he continues to average at 23, he's behind one quarterback.
Yeah. Not too
and
bad.
that would be Lamar Jackson.
That would be
Lamar's at 23.9, and he's at 20. That's per game average right now. That's off of FanDuel scoring for everybody, in case you want to know.
Yeah. I would also say be hesitant of Caleb Williams. I know he had a great week this week. He also has a tough schedule coming up as well. Great. The Bears are 4-2. The 4 teams that they've beaten have a combined 4 wins. They're 4-16. So the competition there is not great. It's nice for him. He gets to beat up on some bad defenses, but I wouldn't put a bunch of stock into Caleb Williams at this point. If you're not playing in a dynasty league, you might want to sell high on him and see what you can get.
You might agree, and even in a season long, it might be a lot of people will say get their best game and trade him right off that because as a sell high, because really, I mean, that you could argue that might be his best game of the year from a fantasy perspective.
Yeah. Running backs. We'll get into running backs real quick, but I want to get into a couple of these questions that we've got coming in.
Yes.
Coda says, would you trade the 3rd overall pick for Jahmyr Gibbs in a dynasty league?
I would not.
No?
I didn't even think. First reaction is no, because Gibbs was overdrafted. If you drafted him in the 1st round, which you most likely did, you overdrafted him. You're not getting 1st round value.
Yeah.
To me, he's the 1B. He's the change of pace. He's the scat back. And Montgomery, if you have Montgomery based on where you drafted him, you're crushing it right now.
Yeah. It would be tough to see. I'd want to look at contracts for each one of those to see where Montgomery falls. But even this last week, before we get too deep in the weeds with running backs, Montgomery finished as the 5th highest running back this last week with 20 points, and Gibbs was down at 22 with 10.5 points. So I would want to see something happen with Montgomery. I would love it if Gibbs was the 1st running back in Detroit, because obviously they're going to continue to put up a bunch of points. But if this stays the same with Montgomery and Gibbs being, basically splitting time, and I think that they were pretty even in week 5.
They are. They're 10-13 right now. Rankings and our PPR rankings. But I just like it's just Montgomery's got the goal line. He's the goal line back most of the time, and to me, that's the tiebreaker. But I mean, Gibbs. I'll be honest, Gibbs is better than I thought. RB13 in PPR, but I just that's a
I think a 3rd round. I think a 3rd overall pick is a little bit. High.
Yeah, I was going to say 3rd overall. That's high.
The 3rd overall pick.
Yeah.
Yeah. Would you trade the 3rd overall pick? So mine would be no. If it's a 3rd round pick, maybe a 3rd round pick.
Yeah, 3rd round. Yeah, 3rd overall, no.
And then we've got another one. Am I reaching overrating to get Cooper and Dobbins for Aaron Jones and Pollard? Aaron Jones and Pollard and Shakir, but I don't really care for Shakir on my team. I got Kamara. So
he's getting Cooper, and who was the other one?
Cooper and Dobbins for Aaron Jones and Pollard. So you're giving up a wide receiver and a running back for 2 running backs. I guess if you're running back needy, that might not be bad. But
I like
Jones,
that trade.
Watch out for him because he's.
I actually like that trade.
Yeah.
Because another takeaway I had was Dobbins is an RB1 in that run-based offense with all those carries last week. He's getting, I think Shakur on the flip side, we talk about that just to put it all together. Shakur takes a hit from a fantasy perspective, if you ask me. I thought he was acting as the Bills' wide receiver one, but I think at some point here, Cooper's going to overtake that. So to me, he suffers from this trade. Shakur, I don't think it affects the tight end as much. I think it affects that wideout. So if you're going to get those, I like the players that person's getting, and he's giving up Shakur and those other two players. I actually like that trade.
Yeah. All right. So getting into running backs, let's go. Looking at last week, I had 4 of my start running backs finish in the top 24. I had 3 of my sleepers finish in the top 15. And all of my sit running backs were out of the top 24. So I nailed the running back waiver wire. I got a lot of questions on Twitter about Tyrone Tracy. Should I start Tyrone Tracy? Absolutely. You should have started Tyrone Tracy. But here's the rankings real quick. We're just going to peruse through these. At number 1 last week is a guy you probably never even heard of, or this last weekend, Sean Tucker in Tampa Bay.
Yeah.
And guess what? If you haven't figured this one out yet, he's owned by exactly 1%.
1%.
Of fantasy football leagues.
I don't know how many people that helped, but if you had him, boy.
Yeah. I had somebody that, would you go after Sean Tucker? I would go after Sean Tucker.
Yes, absolutely. Especially if you're in a deeper league. Again, a lot of these questions, like if you're in a 14-team or a 16-team league like you and I are, Tucker's, you have to go after him because you could be sitting on a gold mine.
Yeah. Obviously, we don't know what's going to happen with that. It's Tuesday. We don't really know what, ideally, I think it should be Bucky Irving and Sean Tucker. I would have given up on Rachaad White a long time ago at this point, being able to barely average 3 points per yard. But then after that, you got Mixon in Houston. Welcome back, Mixon. We had Travis. We had the King at number 3, who was one of my starters. Bijan, number 4, finally. He was one of my sleepers. Montgomery, as we mentioned before, DeAndre Swift, who was one of my start picks for this last week at number 6. Tyrone Tracy, who I said Singletary if he played, and if not, Tracy was the replacement in there. So there's that one as well. Breece Hall at number 8 with 19 points. He was one of my starters. Tyler Algier. So both Bijan and Algier. And this is kind of what you would expect from an Atlanta backfield. If you don't have Algier, and it's weird because I think that he's only owned in maybe 35 to 40% of leagues. I have Bijan in one of my leagues, and it was just within the same draft. I'm thinking maybe 10th round or something like that. I was like, oh, I gotta handcuff.
You have to handcuff him. Absolutely, that was smart, super smart.
Yeah, and I'm thinking I might start them both next week.
Yeah, you could.
Because I got some bye issues coming up here.
I know the buys are. And then you want me to go on my end?
Yeah, go for it, man.
Okay, so I actually did well last week in my slate. Now I had Jacobs as a start. That was a miss. I mean, he had 75% snap rate, had a good matchup. The Cardinals defense was 26 against the run. So I'll take an L on that one. But down at the bottom.
Sean, I had him too. He finished 23rd, and that's good enough for a low RB2. I had him
as
a start. I'm going to consider
not
that
terrible. Yeah, okay. So then I actually did better than I thought. But I also had, for starts, I had David Montgomery, Tony Pollard, and Chase Brown at running back. All 3 scored touchdowns. So those were, running back was good. I just thought Jacobs would do a little bit better. But Love just, he just had they're loaded at receiver. And with him in there, like I told you, I just spoke earlier about that. But for the most part, I did well in my running backs. Sits, at the time I wrote my article, I had Ramondre, who ended up being inactive. So I only had 1 sit in the running backs. I usually do one. I try to give everybody 3 starts, 3 sits, running back, wide receiver, quarterback, or I'll throw a tight in there. But so, Stevenson was my sit, but he ended up inactive, which is a little bit of a surprise. And another running back that I had picked up a lot of leagues, and you just mentioned him, or one of our people wrote in, is that Tyrone Tracy. I actually put him in there and started him, and he's I think he should be the RB1, and Singletary should be the B, because he's just explosive, and that team needs another playmaker to go in there. Like he's one of them guys, if he touches the ball, he can go. I think he fits well. He could be even better when Neighbors comes back, and he should be back this week.
Yeah. For sure. I had Pollard as one of my sleepers. It sounds like you had him as a starter, and I had Najee as another sleeper in there, and he finished at number 10 overall. My sits for last week, I had Brian Robinson, who ended up being out.
Mhm.
Even that, though, if you're going to, I would have said the same thing to sit Austin Eckler, and he finished 27th overall with 8.8 points. I also had Stevenson, but I also would have said, leave Gibson out of your active roster. He finished with 5.8, which was maybe 34th, 35th. And then I had Zach Moss as well. And I couldn't have predicted that one any better because he finished with exactly 0 points on the day.
Yeah.
And he did play. He had a fumble, and then you never saw him again, even though Chase Brown had a fumble later on.
Yeah.
And they let him stay in the game.
And he scored, yeah. But I think that's another situation where I think you're seeing a little bit of a changing of the guard there. I think Brown, I picked up Brown, in a lot of late in drafts a lot because he was pumped up quite a bit as a potential late round. And this, if you're getting these guys in the 10th round and later, they're free, not almost free. So like, there's no risk in taking a Chase Brown in the 10th round or 11th or 12th round, wherever he was going, because if you cut him, it doesn't cost you anything. It's the early round draft picks that don't pan out that hurt you big time.
Yep, you got to shoot for the moon on those late picks. And I don't
double-digit rounds is not. You're not. It's all reward and there's very little risk.
Yeah. I did that same thing in a later round. I picked up Ray Davis and I just stashed him on my bench, and he finished 14th this week, and he is owned by exactly 10% of people right now. But yeah, I had a lot of questions about Chase Brown. The only thing I didn't like about Chase Brown toward Saturday even into Sunday was that he was still listed as questionable, and I hate those late day.
Yes. That's a Monday night game too.
With injuries is just like, okay, what most of them get cleared up. Everybody's going to go on the injury report on Wednesday. Just assume that, and then they'll practice a little bit Thursday, and they'll come out Friday and they go, oh, nothing's wrong with him. But he was still on there as of game day, which was the only thing that I didn't care for with that one.
And our folks out here, Friday is the big day for a Sunday game. If they don't practice on Friday, unless it's a vet rest, which is usually vet rest day is usually Wednesday, not Friday, there's a good chance you have to assume that you have to be ready for an inactive.
Absolutely.
And then Saturday, Cooks was limited, Shakur was limited, and then Shakur was active for the Bills. But Cook, I wouldn't say surprising, but it came out it was a little bit of a surprise, but this could be a long-term injury because we're on running back. You got to be careful because if you looked at the videos out there, if he's got turf toe, that's a debilitating injury. They can put orthotics in there, special shoe, etc., but that's going to limit his explosiveness. There's no way if he plays this week that he's going to be. And obviously, they're telling you that he was somewhat of a surprise and active. He didn't come through warmups very good. So your mention there of Ray Davis, and then even Ty Johnson in the late league is a really good recommendation.
Yep, absolutely. So my waivers, we kind of mentioned one of them. If you could pick up Sean Tucker, I would definitely try to get him. And we just mentioned the other one, Ray Davis. He's one of my top waivers. People, 10%. Dameon Pierce is kind of an anomaly. I know he got most of his rushes toward the end there, but he actually finished 18th overall. He had 14. I would say pick him up if you've got Mixon for sure, because you never know how he's going to turn out. He's only owned right now 5 to 10% of all leagues. And then Kamani Vidal is another one.
That's one I was going to say. Go ahead. That was one of my three.
Yeah, you got J.K. Dobbins is the lone back right now, and Gus Edwards is out for a limited time basis. So, but those aren't even my big ones. My big one that I'm going after, I'm going to give away a little secret. Gorendo.
Yep. That was my second one. So you got two of my three.
Yeah.
Go ahead, buddy. And I got one more in case you don't have it.
Go for it, man.
Well, in the same team, Patrick Taylor. He won't be the early down guy. He most likely will be your passing down. But if you're in PPR, you need a flex play. Taylor could be worse. Now, remember, and you know this already, if Mason plays, obviously, Gorendo would be the higher rank because you want the backup. And then keep in mind, they're still saying week 10 for McCaffrey. So you still have 3 weeks here. And if you can win 3 games because of a pickup, it's worth it.
Absolutely.
I mean, that's a lot, and most likely a 13-week, 14-week regular season for fantasy. So, but Taylor's out there. You said Vidal, love that pick. Scored on a wheel route last week.
Yeah.
Sweet play. And if you started him, as a flex player, it was pumped up a little bit kind of on Saturday, but that was a big time play. And he was, I think he was a 5th round pick. So there's 5th or 3rd round pick, but there's some draft capital there, no doubt. And then I had one more. You said Tucker, who I love. And Ty Chandler. Ty Chandler out there in 69% of leagues. And Aaron Jones, if he's not back, you got a starter right there. You got an RB2 at least. So
Yeah, and I can't remember where I read it because I'm reading stuff constantly, but something about Aaron Jones where this could not be, I think they said day to day, but I think it's going to be more week to week with Aaron Jones. So if you can get your hands on Ty Chandler, unfortunately he's gone in both the leagues that I'm in, but yeah, absolutely. Get him too.
and
But
if you
those
have
would be
James Conner, not to interrupt you, buddy, if you have James Conner, you should already have Trey Benson because he started to get more work last week in the backfield, in the Cardinal backfield. So get Trey Benson, especially if you're a Connor owner. And I actually have Connor in one league, and I drafted Benson.
So you would go Trey Benson over Amari DiMarcardo.
Yeah, I think DeMarcado was more of he's a really good passing back. But I think your early down work and I'm thinking your goal line work is Benson. But DeMarcado's another one in a deeper league. Grab him too because in bye weeks, and especially if you get the half point or a PPR, those receptions are so that are invaluable. You're going to get points for them, so you can do worse. Like your flex, your flex spot, or if you start 3 wide receivers, 2 running backs in a flex. Well, then you might not have the best of the best to put in that flex spot. You need someone who's not going to give you a 0.
Right. Yep, and I would say on a long shot here on a couple of these other ones, Pierre Strong Jr. Is a long shot. Nobody even owns him yet. In Indianapolis, Tyler Goodson had 8.5 points last week, and who knows if Jonathan
passing down back again. There's another passing down back.
And again, his value rises, I think, if Anthony Richardson comes in and is going to have to dump it off.
Yeah.
And then in Miami had a bye last week. Keep your eyes on Devin Achane and maybe Jalen Wright gets into the mix there a little bit.
Yeah, Jalen Wright's another what I like to call lottery ticket to have on there. He might win you the last 4 weeks and do nothing the first 6 or 7, but if he can win you down the stretch, you want your best lineup obviously down the stretch. So.
Yeah, so there's plenty of running backs. I think running backs was probably more so than anything else, and I'll even throw D'Ernest Johnson out there in Jacksonville because who knows what's going on. I mean, obviously Bigsby is your main guy, but ETN
and another passing down back.
Yep, exactly. So there's the wide receiver breakdown. Bruh wants to know, did I win my trade? Gave Bijan, Hunt, Olave for Dobbins, Debo, and London.
It's a good trade for both teams. I mean, that's not the other. I mean, he did well getting back, but you got to give up something to get some. It's not a bad trade, not at all. And also, depending on what his record is, if you're like 1-5 or 2-4, it's a good time to do a trade. So sometimes you just need the trade. Also depends on the roster, like that getting those players back. That might fit nicely for his roster. You and I are kind of just looking at it in a bubble. So, but I mean, I don't hate the trade.
No, I don't dislike it either. Because Hunt hasn't done anything yet. Obviously, we don't know what he's going to do. Or I'm sorry. I'm sorry. I'm thinking Nick Chubb. That's my bad.
Oh, okay.
I had a brain fart there.
Yeah,
it's Bijan Hunt in Kansas City now, not Hunt in.
Who's right now is the one. So Jeff, here's just some update news because I know you and I are good at this. Some minor news. Mike Williams had tests and he cleared concussion protocol. So but it said too early to determine if he will play this weekend. So we'll see.
Interesting.
And now they're also saying not sure if Adams will play. So there's a couple of things. But Williams did not have a concussion.
Okay.
I'm saying Williams did not have a concussion, and they're not saying right now. They're saying it's too early if Adams will dress. If he
right.
does, he's going to be limited probably on some sort of a snap count, I would think, because of playbook and stuff. But I would bet on him, dressing. But that's coming out of Jack camp right now.
Okay. Bruh has a follow-up question that I think we're going to leave to Friday, actually.
Okay.
Come back for an answer on this one. Also, who do I sit this week? Terry McLaurin, Debo, Amon-Ra St. Brown, and Drake London. I will say to be continued. Yeah, if you can start all 4 of them, go for it. If you have to sit one of them, let me do a little research on that one because I haven't gotten into that yet. So there's a long time before next weekend's games. Come back on Friday and watch us.
Yeah, it's hard. It's hard to recommend right now. I'm formulating. Like I said, I'm formulating my article, but I need more information.
Yeah. Ditto. On that note, though, let's get into wide receivers real quick. I'll just go briefly. Top 5 wide receivers from last week. You had Chris Godwin. It seems like it's always back and forth between him and Evans, but Chris Godwin with 30 points. He outperformed everyone because then you've got the next ones. Garrett Wilson with 20 and a half. A.J. Brown with 20 and a half. Welcome back. Here's one that I kind of hinted on earlier. Lazard with 20 and a half. So they had Wilson and Lazard. If you started
with the Hail Mary,
41 points.
The Hail Mary helped that one.
And then McLaurin also at 20 and a half. Those were the only 5 that came above 20. And I'll call starting, I always kind of rank these out to about 32. A couple of my starters from last week hit. I said start McLaurin against the Ravens. He did very well. I had to cheer against my own team a little bit there just to get some points. I also said Drake London, start him. He finished 14th overall with about 16 and a half points. And I had sleeper Zay Flowers, who hadn't done much over the previous weeks. He finished 11th overall. Yep. He had 18 points on the week. Also had CeeDee Lamb, which was kind of a no-brainer. He did finish in the top 24.
Yeah.
But those were a couple of mine for starters and sleepers.
I had a lot of the same as you. And the crazy part is I wasn't even able to be on the show with you last week, but I had, for sits, I had Quentin Johnson against the Steelers D. Limped off a little bit, ended up coming back. And my starts, I was with you. I had, and I put this with my stacks, I had CeeDee Lamb to stack him with Prescott. Disappointed, obviously, but not horrible. I had, for other 2 starts, Drake London and Terry McLaurin. So those are the 3 I had. And then, my sit was Quentin Johnson. And he was finished way down. He wasn't the top 36 wide receiver. But London was 15 in my thing I have here. So, but McLaurin was 5. And like you said, Lamb was very respectable at 19. You expect him to be in the top 12, but at 19, he's not killing you.
Yeah, no, not at all. Out of the people that I said to sit, and this was my big one, everybody was so high on Brian Thomas Jr. last week, going up against Chicago. And that was one I think I got the most flack for on Twitter. People were saying how dumb I was, but Brian Thomas Jr., 4.2 points. Who's dumb now? I said Alec Pierce, 0 points. I said to sit Jacoby Myers, 0 points, although he was inactive. And then I also said to sit Quentin Johnston. I only got you 3.5 points.
And I had him on mine. I did the Steelers individual game at Total Apex Sports. I did Steelers and Raiders right up, and I had Myers in my set.
Nice. A couple of my other sleepers, Amari Cooper, I thought he was going to have a breakout. He didn't really. 6.2. It's not really respectable, but at least he got something. Another sleeper I had was Chris Olave, who was knocked out. Literally, he stayed asleep. -1 point on the day.
I watched that hit too, and when it hit, you could hear the pop on TV, and I said to myself, there's no way he's not concussed. And then they did the pan in on his eyes, and you could see, I'm not sure he knew what stadium he was in at the time.
Other starter that I had was Wan'Dale Robinson. He didn't do quite as well as what I expected, 7.5 points from him. So those were the starter, sitter, sleepers from last week. Waivers, I'm going to let you go first because I feel like I took all your running back waivers last time.
Let me pull mine up here for receivers. All right, one I'll give you a few. Jordan Whittington, because I do not believe that Kupp will play this week. If he does, but I believe he has 19 targets in the last 2 weeks. And McVay knows how to get the ball as does Stafford to his wide receivers. If Cup plays, obviously you're going to temper that a little bit.
And coming off a bye, so you got that extra practice in there.
I remember when I was on your show last time, I told everybody to get Juju Smith-Schuster because he's the possession receiver. Now, this is all predicated on a Deontay Johnson not going there, obviously.
Right.
But Juju, I think, is what my numbers here, only rostered in 25% of leagues. I think he had over 20 points in that Sunday night game against the Chiefs, and people might have forgot about him. I'm sorry, against the Saints. People might have forgot about him because of the bye last week. But that's another one. I get him everywhere I can. And I had one more. In some, I'm going to go with one of your guys here, Rashad Bateman.
Oh, yeah.
9% rostered. And, they kind of found their stride in the passing game last week. Obviously, Zay was big time. They got Andrews the ball. And, Bateman he had a really good camp. I know that much. So I was actually expecting more out of him early in the season. But again, these guys, maybe you're not starting them, but maybe you're holding on to him. And if there ever was to be an injury, which we don't want, obviously, with a Zay Flowers, I think Bateman slides into that role.
Yeah, no, that's a good one. I feel bad. I drafted Bateman in later rounds. And then when the buy started to pick up, he was a casualty. Mm-hmm. So I had to let him loose. But bruh agrees with you. Pick up Juju.
Yeah, I'm getting Juju everywhere I can. I'm actually hoping they don't get anybody at the trade deadline because otherwise that's going to hurt my Juju shares. But
yeah,
I'm just trying to think of anything. Those were my main ones.
Okay.
One more I got here on my list here, Michael Wilson because concussion, Harrison, it's always 90% of the time one missed game. So he slots in there. We know McBride could get a bump in targets, tight end, but on the outside, Wilson, you could, if you need him this week, get him because he could end up the top 24 wide receiver.
Yeah, for sure. One guy that I had up there finished number 7 this week in points. Gabe Davis finished with 19.
Yep.
And I've got Ridley on my team, and I'm just sitting there going, "Did you guys forget that this guy's on your team right now?"
I had to start him, Jeff. He complaining about he had all those targets. Watched him drop a ball right in his hands, hit him in a bad spot, hit him in the hands.
Yeah, right.
Watched him drop it, and then I heard he was complaining about targets. And while you and I are talking, I'm going to try to pull it up here to tell you how ridiculous he is.
He did. I saw that locker room rant. It was got to get more effing involved effing earlier in the effing game, not at the effing end of it. And it's like, dude, can you get some separation? Can you catch a ball?
Yeah, I want to pull this up here for our viewers while we're doing this. But I was just like, I actually did a double take. I was like, come on, you got to help your quarterback. What they pay him for, they're paying him to be the top receiver. All right, not Hopkins. So he wanted targets, right? So he had 9 targets. Okay. 8 targets. Tops on the team. 0 catches for 0 yards. He needs more targets. Well, he got the most targets. So how about you catch him?
Yeah. No, I agree with that.
Fantasy people last week. He gave you a bagel.
Yep. And that's why I'm saying pick up, go out and get Gabe Davis. He's owned in about 15 to 20% of leagues right now. If the Tennessee team is going to put up with Ridley's complaining about nothing, you can look for Gabe Davis to get more, and maybe they move on from Ridley at this point. I'm not sure, but I think Gabe Davis becomes one of the better waiver pickups that you can get. He was the real deal in Buffalo last year too. So, but another one, I'm going to package 2 of these guys together here. We talked about Drake May earlier. How about the New England wide receivers? Demario Douglas finishes in the top 10 with 18 points. And then Keyshawn Boutte, 13.5.
Yep. Yeah,
so almost top 20. So
great point. Douglas was wide receiver 8 on my fantasy data. Excuse me, the fantasy data site I got. And I have one more just to go back and forth with you here.
Yeah.
This is off the trade. Does Judy become the one? That offense is a disaster. But Njoku, I read somewhere, and I agree with. I think Njoku might end up being the most benefit from that. But on the outside, maybe Judy is someone you could pick up as a wide receiver 3 flex play.
Yeah.
They gotta throw the ball obviously to somebody. But I mean, I don't know if you're better off. I think the Deshaun Watson's experiment is about to go up in smoke. He's just awful. I mean, I could tell you this: if there's a defense out there facing the Browns every week, go get them and start them. I did that with the Eagles last week.
Yep. And we get to be the beneficiary of that, don't we? Ravens fan, Steelers fan. I love seeing this shit
because they're gonna end up. I mean, right now, they're looking at a basement for quite a while.
Yeah.
Unless they get that quarterback situation taken care of. I mean,
they got to pay Watson $50 million almost over the next 3 years, guaranteed. That's why you don't guarantee those kind of contracts.
No, they're in cap hell with him.
Yeah. So it's rough, and it goes down now. As in my head, as I was watching him play again this weekend, which trade in NFL history is the worst trade? Herschel Walker to the Vikings, where the Vikings basically gave up.
Yeah, they gave the Cowboys
Super Bowl winning team. Yeah,
they gave them 3 Super Bowls, I think.
Or the Deshaun Watson trade, which is going to screw him for the next 5 years.
I know. Nothing more debilitating to a franchise than missing on the quarterback.
Yeah.
And then the best thing a franchise can do is win when the quarterback's on a rookie contract.
Yep. So some other waiver guys, you probably never heard of Bub Means, but he was the beneficiary in New Orleans this week after Olave and Shaheed going down, and actually Cedric Wilson Jr. They're all questionable for next week. So I don't care who you're throwing in there, if it's Rattler or Carr, if he comes back. Bub Means actually is the main beneficiary. And guess what? Nobody even knows who he is. Nobody owns him, nothing. So there's him. And then look for Troy Franklin as well in Denver. We talked about Bo Nix a little bit. Josh Reynolds is on the IR. Franklin becomes the number 2. It definitely helped out Cortland Sutton this last weekend as well, as he finished with 13.5. But look out for Franklin. He's owned in 1% of
college teammate as well.
Yeah.
Of Nix.
Yep, absolutely. Yep, in Oregon. And then you've got who we kind of talked about a little bit. What happens to Deontay Johnson, and does Xavier Legette become something a little bit more? He's owned in 19% of leagues. He had a pretty decent week, 10 points. So if Deontay goes somewhere, you got Legette.
There's your wide receiver 1.
Yeah. So stick with those guys if you can. And that's all I've got with. Oh, you know what? And I will say this as a down play on a wide receiver here. You've got Downs, and we talked about him too. I actually had an arrow down on Downs. 48% owned, but without Flacco, his stock drops big time.
Yeah, it's Flacco's. Like I said earlier, if you want Richardson to sit on the bench, and I don't believe he is, I'm pretty sure that Stecken came out and said he expects him to play this week. But it's crazy to say that because that guy was so highly touted, Richardson, and I had him in my sit column. Which I wrote before he went inactive. He was my dud of the week. And I guess you could somewhat say I nailed that because he certainly was a dud. He didn't play. But like, if I'm have cold shares, I don't want him to play. And he could turn it around, no doubt. But right now, Flacco's got the offense going.
Yeah. Here's an interesting one. Kind of a long question. Augusto, here's the question. I'll say that first because he poses the question at the end here. What would you give for CeeDee Lamb? And this is what he has. Okay. My running backs are Hall, Kamara, Chase Brown, Dobbins, Hunt, Chubb. He's got amazing running backs.
There's his strength. Yeah. So he needs to go find, not to interrupt you, he needs to go find who the most running back needy people.
Yep.
And you got a lot to dangle there. He can get back some good. Those are all startable assets right there.
Absolutely. If the person that you're trading Lamb for needs some running backs, that's the first thing that I would do.
Yeah, that's where you need to go find.
And then his wide receivers are Drake London, Neighbors, Godwin, Pittman, Deontay Johnson, Schuster. And then he's got tight ends are Bowers and Hawkinson. I wouldn't trade your tight ends. I would leave them alone.
Can I take this team over for him?
Yeah, no kidding.
I mean, it must be, I'm not putting them down or anything. It must be somewhat of a shallow league because that to have that many players,
Yeah.
that's a darn good thing. But
I mean,
I don't know. I mean, he's probably just fine standing put. But
if I package Schuster and maybe one of your running backs, if somebody is running back needy, maybe they do that for Lamb.
Yeah, he wants Lamb, obviously. Yeah, you got to have to, hope if that person is trading Lamb, though, if I'm sitting there and I have Lamb and I want to try to get two really good players for him if I can.
Yeah. All right. So getting into the tight ends here.
Our favorite position.
Stretch out a little bit.
There you go. Boy. Our favorite position.
This has been like the island of misfit toys.
I mean,
even through 6 weeks.
Talk about guesswork, Jeff.
Yeah, it really is. Cole Kmet finishes on top for the week at 21.5, and then you got George Kittle finished at 20, and then it drops off from there. Those are the only two that finished above 20 points. Yeah. After that, you did have Mark Andrews. Welcome back, sir. 14 points for him. McBride, 13.5. Evan Engram, 13. And then to round off the top 6, you had Laporta. I'll throw in the next 3 because they were all at about 11.5. Laporta, Hunter Henry, and Brock Bowers.
Brock Bowers we could argue, besides Trey Tucker, you could argue Bowers will get wide receiver targets now with that. So, I mean, he's a huge beneficiary of that. And you and I use him all the time. I have a ton of his shares, but he's always in our start column, you and I, for.
Oh, yeah.
I mean, you can't. How could you not? I mean, he's so athletic, and like I said, Tucker will benefit, and as the wideout, but Bowers could get another 3-4 more targets a game.
I wish in our fantasy football league, I could have figured out, because I drafted Bowers at one point in time, and I want to say it was round maybe 7 or 8, and it might have been a little early, but I didn't have a tight end, and tight ends were flying off the board for whatever reason. So to everyone who drafted your Andrews and the guys that were supposed to be good. I got Brock Bowers, and I heard somebody in the background, because it was a live thing like this. Somebody in the background go, "Oh, what is he thinking? I'm thinking I got a really great tight end, and he's probably still leading the NFL right now. And if not, he just got a huge bump up with Devontae Adams not being there."
Well, last week, no Adams, right? 10 targets from the tight end position, tied for first with Evan Engram. All right, and he caught 9 of those balls. He caught 9 of those balls, by the way.
Yeah, he's solid. And Evan Engrams, by the way, led the NFL in receptions for tight ends last year. He's on that kind of a defense, just to kind of preface what we're talking about there. But my starts for this week, I had McBride finishes number 4, and I also had Kyle Pitts, who tied for 12th. I thought he was going to do a little bit better. My sleepers, Zach Ertz, who finished 10th with about 8.5, 9 points. And then I had Dalton Kincaid, who didn't quite make it. He was somewhere around 14, but still would have gotten you a respectable 8 points in there.
Yeah, I had one for me, and I like to pay up for tight. I like to pay up usually for quarterback, or I like to not miss on quarterback, because I'm kind of speaking from the DFS, spot. And I had Bowers as my tight end, because I think that's another spot. You could pay down at tight end or whatever, but you could end up with no points. I mean, I like to have that spot solidified with my quarterback and the DFS, and then get value at the other spots, because I think you would agree, how much value is there at tight end? So you might as well spend up at tight end, get your good quarterback, try to get the lower owned. Last week, like I did, I tried to get the Prescott, who I thought would be lower owned, and then so I don't want to zero at that. So then, like I said, there's lots of great options at the running back and wideout spot.
Yeah. My sits for last week were Isaiah Likely, 3.7, Pat Freiermuth, 2.6, and then Mike Gesicki, 0 points. So I feel like I nailed that one. My other sleeper on the week was Dalton Schultz. He didn't quite wake up, 4.5 points for him. But waivers for this week, I've got a couple. I'm only going to say I got 2.
Okay, go ahead.
I've got Hunter Henry, because he's only owned in 26% of leagues. So he's got to be out there for somebody.
And he's going to be valuable with a good quarterback under center.
Yeah, with Drake May throwing the ball around now, I think his value goes up. And then Zach Ertz.
Yep.
And both of these guys coming into next week too. Hunter's got a great matchup with Jacksonville, and Ertz has a great matchup against Carolina. So both of those guys, I think, and Ertz is owned by 25% as well. So both of these guys might be available. Go get yourself a tight end, especially if you got Cole Kmet, who's on a bye.
Yep. Well, you got one of mine was Zach Ertz. I'll give you two more. Cade Otton does pretty well in that passing offense, and Baker's dealing. As possibly the third option in the passing game behind the obvious two wideouts. And then the tight end from if you're really, really desperate, for lack of better words, the tight end from the Eagles, Grant Calcaterra, because Goddard, he did go down last week. So keep your eye on him. You could do worse and be in a worse offense, obviously.
Yeah.
But that also could work against you because they could ignore that spot and the extra targets go to Saquon, maybe Gainwell out of the backfield, or obviously two wideouts.
Yeah, Calcaterra finished with 8.5 points. Nobody owns him. Probably never heard of him
That's not terrible.
before.
8.5 points. That won't kill the tight end spot.
Yeah,
that was good for 12 last week. And in my spot here, he was 12th, tight end 12.
Wow.
So,
and then Cade Otton owned by about 35% of leagues too, and he's got a good matchup. I hate to say it against Baltimore.
Yep. Cade Otton, 6 targets. Unfortunately, 2 catches, but 6 targets from the tight end position. We'd all sign up for that.
Oh yeah. So there's your tight ends for the week. And then my last one that I've got is defenses. Can play a part. It depends. I guess if you're looking at the top, maybe half a dozen or so, you've got Detroit who finished number 1. I don't even know what to say about that one. Dallas just really.
They were,
and then you had Tampa Bay at number 2 with 17 points, Pittsburgh number 3 with 14 points, and then it gets pretty mishmashed up in there. Houston, Cleveland, Green Bay, Chicago, they all finish with double-digit points as well. For my waivers, and I didn't even put down here, I could probably look it up pretty quick on who I was going to start sitting and sleep. But my waivers, I'll start with that one for next week. Cincinnati, I don't know if they're the real deal or not. Only 15% owned, and they've got Cleveland next week. So to your point, whoever's going up against Cleveland, and now we know that they don't have Amari Cooper, that Cincinnati defense could really put something together if you've got either the Dallas or Detroit defense or a terrible matchup somewhere else. And then you've also got, I like these two, and they're both bad defenses. But because I have Chicago's defense and there's not a lot that's actually out there, I've got the Rams coming off of a bye, going up against Vegas, who hasn't had Devontae Adams, who still won't ever. And then you've got Washington, who's owned by about 4% of the league, going against Carolina. So those are really deep kind of defenses if you need somebody.
I've got 2 for streaming purposes. One you already said with the Bengals, so I'll go right to my second. Now, I got 2 points here. So first, the Chargers, who I picked up a lot. Now, this week's matchup is Monday night the back end of the doubleheader. They're at Arizona. Okay, not the greatest, but then they've got Saints with probably Rattler, Browns, and then Titans. So if you pick them up, you could start them for 4 straight weeks. Another thing is check your waiver wire with the Vikings. Had a bye last week. Someone might have dropped them. They were number 1 in most fantasy leagues before the bye week, obviously. So check and see that they're not out there in waivers. You can go grab them because they're a good fantasy real-life defense. Good real-life defense and a very good fantasy defense.
Yeah, absolutely. And just looking at I had to pull up my starts and sits. I actually said to start Pittsburgh last week. And like I mentioned before, they finished number 3. I also said to play the Chargers. They finished with 8 points, so not bad there. I had sitting New Orleans. They finished with about 9. Sit the Giants. And then my sleepers were Tampa Bay, who finished number 2.
Number 2.
So not too bad. But I'll throw this one out there as well. After the first few weeks, Denver was really doing well, and they're still a very high point overall. I dropped Denver last week, before last weekend, because if you look at their schedule, it's going to get a lot harder. And it's funny because the team that picked them up started them, and they didn't do very well this week. So
and Surtain has got a concussion. He's probably not going to play. I think he has a concussion. Well, that affects their defense because they don't have to, when you can leave a guy on an island, it's totally different schematically when you don't have an island corner. A straight cover corner. Now you're changing your whole schematic of your defense when you have a shadow corner and you don't have a shadow corner anymore.
Yep, that's tough. So beware of Denver. And I'm just, they're ranked right now really high, but their next couple of games coming up, they'll have a pretty decent one this Thursday night against New Orleans. But then after that, you're looking at Baltimore, KC, Atlanta. They've got a couple of easy games. But if you're going to make the playoffs, you're looking at Indianapolis, the Chargers, Cincinnati. Think twice on Denver. Don't drop them like I did. I didn't need them. I've got two good defenses already. So matchups are better. Always look at the matchups.
Yeah, I like to go. I didn't end up holding on to the Vikings in my one. Someone picked them up, and that's fine. I'd rather have the depth and pick up the depth at running back or wide receiver than hold on to the defense. So I ended up starting the Eagles last week. They're out there. There's always a defense you could start to me on waivers. I mean, 1 week at a time. There's just always one or two out there that you can use. I mean, can it make a difference? If they score, yeah, obviously there's a difference. But if they don't score, doesn't usually make a huge impact. Like in DFS side, I punt at defense. Like you could punt last week, and guess who you could get for almost nothing last week? The Buccaneers.
Yeah.
On DFS, they were dirt cheap, and like you said, they finished, I believe, 1 or 2 in defense last week.
I had Tampa Bay at number 2 with 17 points and 35%
Lions
owned.
1,
and Detroit was number 1 and 14% owned.
I think they were $3,100 on FanDuel, which is like minimal pricing.
And now this upcoming week, you're probably not going to want to go with either one of those defenses because you've got Detroit going up against Minnesota, Tampa Bay going up against Baltimore. Be weary of them. Even Green Bay, only 46% owned. They're going up against Houston. I'd be careful with that one.
Yep.
So defenses are more of a trade by a week by week. And what I have already done is go and try to find 1 or 2 defenses that you can have and alternate with for the remaining 10 weeks of your fantasy football league.
And another one, and like I said too, is I try to get ahead. So I did the Chargers, and you're going to be able to use them the next. Well, I used them last week against the Broncos, and then you can get them. You can still use them for the next 4 weeks. The Cardinals are the worst of the 4, but you can still get Murray to turn it over, and he's not a slam dunk quarterback. And they're going to be probably without Harrison too, so that helps.
It certainly does. Yeah, I've got in our fantasy turf war league, I've got Buffalo and LA, and I'm hanging on to both of them for the remainder of the season and just going back and forth because they easy schedules, man.
Yep.
So, well, that's all I've got. That's all we've got. And look at that. We're almost at an hour. This is perfect.
Like we know what we're doing, right, buddy?
I didn't have anything for kickers. I don't know if you.
Yeah, I had one kicker. I don't even know if he's still out there, but there's one kicker I picked up a couple weeks ago that he's still out there, and it says in mine, it's still out there in 57% of leagues. Austin Seibert of the Commanders, tied to a good offense. I got him everywhere now.
I picked him up before last week because I think I had Dicker or I had somebody. Yeah, I couldn't remember who I had, but I had to drop somebody and whatever. And it's like, all right, he's got a good matchup against.
Yeah, I mean, you can. He's almost becoming a set it and forget it.
Yeah, I'm just kind of pulling up kickers right now. What do we got here?
Yeah, that's all.
Obviously, Aubrey is the number 1.
Yeah,
he's kicking like a madman. But Siebert's number 5 overall on the year.
Yeah, I doubt anybody's dropping him, but maybe someone drops him. Keep an eye out.
Yep. High offenses. Maybe not Zerline, though, after last night.
Yes.
The crazy thing about that is my wife, little side note, my wife, she had a 50-50 chance going into last night's game.
Okay.
And she was going up against a team that only had Zerline. And he hasn't had more than 6 points. And she was up by 6 points. Well, as soon as he gets his points, then he boinks 2 field goals and doesn't make them. She's like, really? This is how I'm going to lose? I'm going to lose by 1 point? So he got just enough, and that was it.
I was playing against him. I think I had like a 13-point lead, and they said I had a good chance to win, and he hit a longer kick. Then he hit a decent – he scored right in the first drive. I was like, I could lose this. I could lose.
Yep. Crazy.
Yep.
All right, my man.
Okay.
Friday it is, huh?
Friday, we'll see everybody Friday. Thank you for having me on. And then I'll have my article out at Total Apex Sports by then. And then some individual DFS stuff. Check me out there. Check out Jeff's stuff. He does a lot of great stuff at Downfield Read on his YouTube channel. So I just want to plug my man out there. And appreciate you having me on as always.
Yeah, not a problem. This is fun as always. Definitely check out Sean's stuff too. We agree probably 70% of the time, but there's some things that even what Sean says coming into these things like, oh yeah, I'm going to make a note of that. So definitely check out his stuff. Good stuff as always,
right,
man. Appreciate
we'll see
it.
you Friday. Take care.
Have a great
okay?
week, and we'll
You
chat
too.
in the meantime.
All right. Take care.
Later.
Later.